Hey internets, so the hot new idiotic propaganda that should be refuted in this video is this recent narrative that it is racist or false. To point out the fact that Kamala Harris is a DEI candidate or DEI hire. There's also this extremely bad faith narrative that the very phrase DEI hire is some kind of racist dog whistle for saying the N-word, which it absolutely is not. This pretty easily takes the cake for one of the absolute stupidest narratives we've seen from the mainstream media in quite a while. Because first off, it's basically just the same equivocation fallacy that they've been polling for a while, but with a twist to it. But also because normally corporate news outlets simply take a set of facts and twist them until what they are saying is an untrue statement about a true fact or a true event. But this narrative we're seeing in defense of Harris here is an interesting case where the media is just kind of going all in on the gaslighting and saying something that is just objectively 100% not true. Kamala Harris is a DEI hire. This is not something you can argue against. Now, a lefty can attempt to argue that her being a DEI hire is a good thing if they're actually honest about their definition of racism, which they're usually not. They would be wrong, but they can at least try to make that argument. However, you cannot say that she isn't a DEI hire, and you cannot say that simply pointing out a fact about an individual is somehow racist when racism is an element of collective guilt. So to explain this, let's just start out by explaining what a DEI hire is. A DEI hire is simply when a person is hired or accepted into a position or role of authority because of their status as a member of a diverse group or some kind of subjective collective group that has some kind of collective inequity for the purpose of including a member of that group, as opposed to them being competent or skilled in that position or role. It's basically a way of discriminating for the sake of affirmative action. Now, the problem with DEI hires, and the reason people often point it out as criticism, is because of the meritocracy-kakistocracy dichotomy that I pointed out in one of my previous videos. You are either trying to find the most competent individual to fulfill the target role, or you are not. Everything in between is just a different scale of doing that or not doing that. Some things bring you closer to meritocracy or going for competence, and some things bring you closer to kakistocracy. And DEI is unfortunately one of those things that leads to less competence. That is the problem, and there is no getting around this. It is either merit or incompetence or something in between, which is what DEI hires tend to be. That's why most reasonable people who actually understand what DEI is and how it works don't like the practice of hiring based on DEI, because it logically must result in a less competent world. If we are hiring someone based on their collective identity first as the main requirement, then that means less focus is going to be placed on competency, which means a world run by less competent people, in other words, idiocracy. And then of course when you realize this, you also realize that it's very obvious that DEI is not some kind of racist dog whistle. If anything, it's exactly the opposite, because DEI requires you to consider a person's race, while not doing DEI doesn't require you to consider that. Which means you are actually being less racist if you are being against DEI hiring practices. That's actually the main contradiction of DEI hiring practices and why it is such a hot debate topic. DEI practices just try to fix racism with more racism, and it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked. Because when you force businesses to consider a person's race over their competency like this, what actually ends up happening is people just start questioning the competency of people of color, which obviously isn't what you intended. In fact, you can actually summarize a lot of leftist policies and philosophy with that. It's people doing things without really understanding the consequences. Because a lot of woketoids haven't actually thought things through to their logical conclusions. They don't actually understand their own philosophy or ideas or where they lead, with the exception of a few Marxists who do know what they are doing and are just unironically evil authoritarians, and are perfectly happy with tanking race relations as a way for them to gain power. Anyways, back on topic. Calling someone a DEI hire effectively means you just suspect that the reason they were hired was based more on some subjective group identity they have and less based on their actual ability. It's saying that you suspect the only reason that they are in their position or role of authority is in order to check off some diversity, equity, or inclusion checkbox. Now, this all being said, it is actually possible for it to be somewhat racist to call someone a DEI hire, but this is only when there is absolutely no evidence that they're a DEI hire. Reasons to suspect someone is a DEI hire either come from A, evidence of incompetence, or B, direct statements from those in charge of deciding to hire them that they were picked based on their status as a person of diversity. So pointing to a random black person and saying they are only here because they are black, with no evidence or reason to suspect that they aren't competent, or no evidence suggesting that ethnicity was used in the hiring practice, can potentially be a bit racist, but it is difficult to objectively prove either way. However, when it comes to the Kamala Harris question, well, this isn't even up for debate. we can objectively prove that she is a DEI hire by both of these standards. First off, we know that Kamala Harris is a DEI hire because Joe Biden told us she is a DEI hire. During the debate with Bernie Sanders for the 2020 election, he stated he would commit to choosing a woman for his VP pick. This was then later whittled down within the DNC further when Amy Klobuchar and others further urged Biden to go with a woman of color, despite the fact that Klobuchar herself was technically more qualified if you go by performance in the debates and in the primaries. One another example being Elizabeth Warren, who also outperformed Kamala Harris in 2020. The people did not like Kamala Harris during the DNC's candidate selection process. So just from these facts alone, we have confirmed direct evidence that Kamala's status as a woman of color was a big part of the reason she was chosen as Biden's VP, despite more competent and popular choices existing. Therefore, it is just an objective statement of fact to call Harris a DEI hire. So then, what of this propaganda saying that it is wrongthink to suggest that Kamala Harris is a DEI hire? Well, first off, to some degree, it's just the same old equivocation fallacy on the definition of racism that these clowns have been playing for years in an attempt to gaslight the populace into thinking that you have to be a collectivist to stand against collective guilt, which of course makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I've kind of explained this in other videos, but I'll go over it pretty quickly in a slightly different way because it's important that people know how to spot this particular type of grift. Woketoids love to play this intellectually dishonest game where they equivocate between two definitions of racism that contradict each other. Any sane person uses this definition of racism down here, where judging someone based on their collective racial identity and holding them collectively guilty based on that assessment is what is considered racist. However, Woketoids are going by the racism equals prejudice plus power definition, which implies that it's okay to hold an individual under the grounds of collective guilt, so long as it's for the sake for achieving collective equality. It's basically just Marxist stupidity. Now, an equivocation fallacy occurs when a person jumps between two different definitions in order to confuse people with what they are meaning. And this particular equivocation fallacy is very insidious because, again, it's jumping between two definitions that actually contradict each other. When they say that calling someone a DEI hire is racist, they're of course using this cathedralite definition. They're using this prejudice plus power definition. They're basically saying that, hey, you're against us using collective guilt in order to create collective equality. But of course they don't say it like that because then everybody would realize what they're actually saying is just pure nonsense. Nobody actually likes collective guilt, and the few people who say that they do like collective guilt don't really like it, because as soon as they are placed on the collective guilt chopping block, they immediately change their beliefs. So what they do is they say the word racist while having this cathedralite definition in mind, knowing full well that everyone listening to them is going to be using this colloquial definition of racism. Here's a clip from Morning Joe that shows this scam in action.
He's going to hire a black female for vice president, and that he just skipped over. What about white females? What about any other group? It just, when you go down that route, you take mediocrity, and that's what they have right now as a vice president.
Are you suggesting she was a DEI hire?
100%. She was a DEI hire.
Wow.
Yeah. Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee complaining about Vice President Kamala Harris being.
Is it 1951? Is it 1951?
I'm so.
Was he about to go
him.
into like a country club in like rural Tennessee there, like in 1951? Is he serious? If you are a black woman, then you're a DEI hire?
So yeah, back in 1951, this here cathedralite definition of racism didn't actually exist. So this proves right away that he is using this particular type of equivocation fallacy. He's trying to call just simply calling someone a DEI hire racist, knowing full well that people are going to be thinking about this definition down here at the bottom, which considers collective guilt a bad thing. And yet, again, what he's saying only makes sense if you assume that collective guilt is a good thing. Of course, there is another possibility here, which is that Joe just has absolutely no idea what he's talking about and doesn't even realize that he's contradicting himself. But considering that he's a well-paid propagandist worth millions of dollars, that's probably not the case. He also is heavily misrepresenting what Burchett actually said. He did not say that she is a black woman, therefore she is a DEI hire. All he did was merely point out the fact that her being a black woman was used in the process of deciding for her to be the vice president pick. Which, again, is an objective statement of fact because we know this from statements from Joe Biden himself as well as other members on the DNC. So in addition to the equivocation, he is just flat out lying to you. And that's where the twist of this comes in. If you search around for other media input, and other various posts being thrown around the interwebs, you will quickly find out that it is not just Joe Scarborough who is deliberately misrepresenting the reasons behind why people are calling Kamala Harris a DEI hire. So in other words, they're starting with this equivocation fallacy, and then they're adding gaslighting on top of it. They are trying to trick people into thinking that the evidence that Kamala Harris is a DEI hire doesn't actually exist, by deliberately misrepresenting the entire conversation. And why are they doing this? Well, it's basically all just for the sake of propaganda. Kamala Harris has now been chosen as the current Democratic Party darling, despite the fact that her policies record is terrible and she's never actually won any primary votes. This means that DNC's media allies have to somehow push the narrative that Kamala Harris is the best pick for the job, despite the fact that the evidence shows that she was not picked for her role based solely on merit. So the mainstream media is just flat out lying to you about what a DEI pick is, what it means, and what it implies, and by deliberately gaslighting you about all the evidence that proves what they are saying is wrong. And because this narrative is so obviously and ridiculously false, they can only get away with it by just adding gaslighting on top of the usual equivocation fallacy. It's a very stupid grift, the evidence is overwhelmingly against it, and therefore absolutely nobody who is pushing this narrative should be taken seriously. It is just a propaganda campaign, nothing more. They are just using the race card to distract people from the fact that Kamala Harris is just going to be another deep state puppet. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe, or comment for the algorithm. Or if you really liked it, you can support me on Ko-Fi, or Subscribestar, or by buying some merch. That is all. Till next time.